Hello and welcome everyone to the Gacha Guide. Do you want to know if a servant is good enough to spend your hard-earned quartz on? Well, you've come to the right place. Today, our topic servant is the Iron Chef of Hell, Benienma. We will be covering all the points you see on screen. Before we go into these, I do want to give a fun fact with Benny. She speaks with a lisp due to being a tongue-cut sparrow, so in most of her dialogue, the S sounds are replaced with the ch sound, as in like a bird chirping. So words like desu become dechi, dekimasen becomes dekimachen, etc. It's very cute. Pay attention to it when listening to her dialogue. So, let's jump ourselves into whether I think this servant is worth rolling for or not. In my personal opinion, Benienma is a pretty darn good roll. Benny is an example of a well-designed character with a balanced skill set. She has buffs, debuffs, MP charge, defensive skills, damage increases. She's got just about a little bit of everything. On top of that, she has a very good niche in dealing bonus damage to any enemies that are chaotic or evil, and especially any that are both, meaning she can dish out some pretty high damage on top of having good utility. Benny is quite good at covering many points. Now let's look into why with her stats. Benienma is a 5-star Saber class servant, meaning she is strong against lancers and weak to archers. She has 11,607 attack at level 90. This is smack dab in the middle for 5-star servants in general, while her HP at 90 is 13,960, again, very much in the middle. Her hidden stats show that her NP gain on hit is 0.56%, pretty average, a little above average. As for her cards, her quick card does 6 hits, her arts cards do 3 hits, and her buster card does 1 hit, while her extra attack does 5 hits. These are relatively good hit counts. Buster naturally gives very little in terms of its star or NP gain, so a lower hit count on Buster doesn't matter that much. Meanwhile, arts and quick give you good NP gain and star generation, respectively, so having higher hit counts on those are very good to have. Her star weight, aka how easy it is to get stars onto her cards instead of other servants, is at 100. Again, very much the average, very in the middle. Her star creation rate, 10.3%, average. Overall, her stats come out to be very average overall. However, the way that they're put together makes her a very balanced character with a couple of good specialties, such as the ability to create a pretty good amount of MP gain off of her arts and quick cards, along with a pretty good star gen off the single quick card despite only having the one. Moving on to her deck and her Noble Phantasm. Her deck contains, as you saw before, 2 arts cards, 1 quick card, and 2 buster cards. This is our standard 2-1-2 deck. And her Noble Phantasm, Juo Hanketsu, Suzura no Michiyuki, Judgment of the 10 Rulers of the Afterlife, Journey of the Wicker Basket, is in Arts, single target Noble Phantasm. It does 5 hits, deals damage to 1 enemy, and then, based on the overcharge, will deal 40 to 60% bonus damage against chaotic enemies, and 40 to 60% bonus damage to evil enemies. This does stack on top of each other. So, this is a very, very simple NP. It doesn't have any bonus effects, it just does damage. It's actually pretty darn good despite the lack of any bonus effects, because there are quite a few chaotic enemies, quite a few evil enemies, and even a fair amount of chaotic evil enemies. In fact, here's a list of all of them. Here's a ton of chaotic enemies, quite a few evil enemies, and a pretty robust list of chaotic evil enemies that you can deal with. There's a whole lot of targets for Benienma's NP bonus to apply to. Next up, let's take a look at her passives. Benienma has Magic Resistance A for 20% more debuff resistance, Independent Action A for 10% bonus critical damage, Presence Concealment A for 10% bonus star generation, In Creation B, which is basically a fancier, more specific version of territory creation, 10% arts performance boost, and finally, her own unique skill, Ventriloquism EX, which gives herself skill seal debuff immunity. Benny has some fantastic passives. Pretty much every single one of these passives are very, very good and are what you want to see on servants. It's honestly a good example of the kind of passives all servants really should have. A few good generic ones, and a unique great one for themselves. Benienma is going to be doing a lot more than what you would think she does, especially with this skill seal debuff immunity, which can help a lot in certain challenge fights where that can become a little bit of a spammable skill that the enemy will use. Now let's move on to her skills. First off, very simple. Mind's Eye False, our standard one turn of evasion with a 20 to 40% critical damage increase. It's a good defensive move for one turn, a strong 3-turn buff, a solid skill, one we've seen on plenty of other servants. Now, her second skill is a bit more unique. Star Basket Big. This reduces all enemies' defense for 3 turns between 10 to 20%, reduces all enemies' critical attack chance for 3 turns between 20 to 30%, seals their MP for the turn this is used, and heals all enemies by 1000 HP. So this is a good skill that has a lot of utility things combined together. Reducing defense is always something you want. Reducing critical attack chance becomes more and more important as time goes on because a lot of fights are going to involve enemies stacking critical damage and one-shotting you. And sealing an NP for one turn has always been a nice ability to have in order to offset skill cooldowns and make sure that you can get around an enemy's MP. Healing an enemy for 1000 health is pretty negligible. 1000 damage is almost nothing. 1000 damage is something that you're able to do with pretty much any servant single attack card, so that's absolutely not a problem at all. Overall, this is a very good skill with a lot of good utility. Our third skill, Star Basket Small. This is another bunch of utility. It increases the party's attack for 3 turns between 10 to 20%, increases the party's debuff removal resistance for 1 turn between 50 and 100%, charges the party's MP gauge between 10 and 20%, recovers the party's HP by 1000, and recovers all enemies' HP by 1000. So, whereas the second skill is a bag of debuffs for the enemy, the third skill is a bag of buffs for the team. Again, very nice. It has a charisma buff in it, and it's even got good numbers on it. Buff removal resistance all the way up to 100%. Even if it's only for 1 turn, that helps out, especially with certain characters. And NP generation for the whole team. Even if it's 20%, because it's across the whole team, it's an effective 60%, so it actually feels very good to have. Again, this is a fantastic example of a good skill with some small numbers on them, but with enough things put together that they add up to be something big. It really makes you wonder why they don't buff certain other characters like Helena, for example, who has a skill that is just a pure 20% MP charge for the whole team. That skill looks terrible, almost worthless compared to this, which does that, plus 3 more things. With these skills, you can see Benienma brings a bunch of utility, and just about all of it is pretty darn good. None of her skills give crazy high buffs or debuffs, but because they do so many little things, they add up very nicely. And the numbers aren't so small that they're negligible. 20% less defense on an enemy actually makes a difference. That's a pretty decent damage buff for you. In fact, some of these stronger single target defense downs get maybe to 30–40% if you're lucky. So in general, 20% is quite good. Now, what materials do we need to level up these skills? Obviously, we want to level them high because these are some good skills. Good news, everyone! Benienma skills are quite cheap overall to level up. To max out a single skill, it will take you 15 lanterns, 18 seeds, 24 Chinese bells, and 24 Magatama. The bells are relatively new, so at the time of her release, they may be the one thing that people are lacking a little bit of, but everything else has been out for a while. None of these are gold rarity materials. They were all silver or lower rarity, so they have a pretty good drop rates if anyone needs to farm them, so they're not too bad to make up for if you don't have them right away. To max her out, it will take you 45 of the lanterns, 54 of the seeds, 72 bells, and 72 Magatama. Overall, quite cheap to max her out. Very good. So how does Benienma stack up against her competition? Well, as a 5-star single-target saber, her main competitions are Okita Soji, Nero Bride, Miyamoto Musashi, and Sigurd. In terms of raw damage output, Benienma puts out the lowest damage at a base. However, if you are hitting her special chaotic or chaotic evil enemies on an NP turn, her damage output shoots right below Sigurd in second place for what she can do. At least until Musashi gets her buff and lets her turn into an alter ego killing machine. But what Benny does have that the others do not, I guess except for Nero Bride, is the strong utility that she brings on her abilities, allowing her to support the team, debuff enemies, buff herself, etc. I think in general, Benienma outdoes the likes of Sigurd and Musashi for now due to her very strong utility, her good overall damage, especially against anything chaotic evil. Benienma does better than Nero Bride as a main damage dealer because of these things. And while Okita Soji is quite good, she does have the drawback of having only single turn buffs for herself, which means that Okita does a little bit more poorly in those challenge fights because break bars and everything really make them last more than just one turn. So in general, I think Benny is quite high on this list. Outdoes her competition in most challenge fights due to all of the utility she's able to bring, and unless they are a single large health bar of health, Sigurd and Musashi will not be able to compete with her because they're very much geared to one big burst turn. Same with Okita even. So, overall, I think Benienma does very well. Very, very well for herself. Now, if you do roll for Benienma, what skills should you prioritize in leveling? Very simple. Very simple. Suggest, as always, the skill with the NP charge first, because it's an NP charge for the whole team especially, and it brings a nice attack benefit for herself. So that's great. Next, I would focus on her second skill. It brings a whole bag of debuffs to throw at the enemy, which are very nice, and along with being able to seal an NP turn. But mainly, scaling those debuffs and having this on a lower cooldown is something you want as quickly as possible. And then finally end off with her first skill whenever you feel like it, because the only thing that's really going to scale is that crit damage, as opposed to scaling multiple things with the other skills. However, I do suggest getting them all leveled as high as you possibly can, because Benienma is best being put forward into challenge fights, and the lower cooldowns with better effects will help you a lot. Ooh, don't grab the background. Alright, as for craft essences, what should we equip to her? Benienma, being an arts-based servant with overall pretty decent MP gain and best being used in challenge fights, my suggestions would be, first off, my favorite for her is Dive to Blue. It is my favorite free-to-play event CE that everybody that's been playing for a while should have, as it gives you 10% arts up, 10% MP damage up, and 50% starting MP gauge. If you started a little bit later in the game, then this is another good free-to-play event CE that you can use that came out a bit later called Painting Summer. And it is a little different. It gives 10% arts up, 10% MP generation up instead of MP damage, and 50% starting NP gauge. These two are very similar to each other and are interchangeable based on whether you want to do more damage in a single NP or be able to generate another MP a little bit easier. And finally, I would suggest the Black Grail for those of you that have been able to pull it into any challenge fight, because it gives a 60 or 80% max limit broken MP damage up at the cost of only a mere 500 HP per turn. It is a massive damage increase and great for any challenge fights, considering Benienma is able to restore her own HP and her own NP gauge pretty easily with her cards. Alternatively, if you're doing just a quick farming run, and there is a single large enemy to deal with, then Kaleidoscope is certainly something that you can equip to her and swap her in. She has a 20% self-gauge that she can fill and be able to instantly NP whatever she needs to. Now, as for servants to pair her up with, as an arts servant, it should be very, very obvious. First off, we'll start with Waver. It's impossible to ignore Waver. He's always a very good servant to bring. He has 50% MP charge, attack up, defense up, and crit damage up. He's just the most all-rounded support servant out there and is never a bad choice. However, as Benny is an arts-based servant, the best servant that you can currently bring with her is Tamamo no Mae. Tamamo brings a 50% arts up for 3 turns, NP charge and heals with her NP for those challenge fights, and an NP damage up, which is going to be added very soon with a strengthening, in order to help support Benny in those longer fights. Paracelsus von Hohenheim is, I think, the better budget support that you can bring with her. He brings a 20% arts up across the team and upwards of 50% MP generation up to target onto Benienma and help out. And of course, I can't talk about anything art servant-wise without mentioning the alpha support lurking in the future. In a year and a half from this video's publishing date, Caster Artoria will come out on NA and be the best art support servant in the game. Hell, she's probably the best support in general. Once she is out, she is 100% going to be the best servant to come with any of your arts-focused servants. You can even pair her with Tamamo if you like Tamamo a lot, but it's pretty impossible to ignore how insanely strong Castoria is once she's out. So quick too long didn't watch here. Benienma is a great servant to roll for. She brings a ton of utility into battles, she does very good damage against her preferred targets, Chaotic Evil, and she honestly doesn't really have anything where I would call a weak point to her. She's a very good all-rounder with nothing weak and a little bit of a specialty. She's great for challenge fights or fights with single big enemy waves. She plays well and is easily at least an A-tier servant. But if you need another reason to roll for her, I mean, she's absolutely adorable and she'll cheer you on for anything. Look at that cute burb. And I mean she'll cheer you on for anything. So if you enjoyed this video, check out my Twitch channel and all that. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I will see you next time.